We're going way back in the time machine today. The king of all shallow water crankbaits, the original Scout. Ready, run and gun? It's time for blast off. Let's go. Hey guys, Todd here with you. Welcome back to Bassin 101. Figured I'd go retro with the hat on this one. The Water Scout. Man, they were made by Clark. And then eventually they got bought out by Strike King, and they called it the Charles Spence Scout. Now, the original Scout was developed, I think, around 1920s, 1930s, and they actually had got a patent for the lip. And there's a deep water one too, but the shallow seemed to be the king on it. They're made of cedar, and later in the 90s they ended up making them out of plastic. That's a good bait, and I've got one right here that is made out of plastic. The old plastic models with the silicone tail. These are okay, especially with the twin line ties on them, but I'll be honest with you, I like the wooden ones. They have a lot more action to them. They're much more sensitive to what you do with a rod tip. You can actually use these as a top water bait, kind of twitch them along on top, and then you can also use them as a wake bait. Keep your rod tip up, keep a slow retrieve. This thing will react with a slow retrieve. This is I consider this to be a frog on hot asphalt. This has got a lot of action to it. Doesn't run more than 2 or 3 feet deep. That's about as deep as you can get them. Now you can cheat and run, say, about 6 inches to a foot. You can run, say, about a 3/16 or 1/4 ounce worm sinker, peg it in the rubber band like I was telling you about, and you can maybe drag this thing down a little bit deeper. But these do float. They did make plastic ones in those days too. Here's a plastic model, and this one is actually a very slow sinker. It might sink a foot in 15-20 seconds. It's that slow. But this does not float. But even though this one didn't float, I still didn't get hung up. So it's basically a 4x4 in a crankbait, because you can throw that sucker in the middle of anywhere, it'll come right back to you. Barbed wire, it don't matter. It'll come back to you with minimal hang-ups, if any at all. I do not put split rings on these. What I do with these is I do use the KVD short shank EWGs. Again, no split rings. And you can get rubber skirts. Some came with them, some did not come with them. But it's kind of cool that Charles Spence, when he first started Strike King, this is what he did. He bought Clark and started making the Water Scout. He called it the Spence Scout. And really, if you have a Clark and you have a Strike King, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. Back when he first started like that, it's hard for me to tell which is a Clark and which is a Strike King. It really is. Because they're that identical, because when Charles bought the company, he bought everything. And I like these because it's a very buoyant bait, and to me this kind of goes hand in hand with a spinner bait, especially if you're throwing it in shallower water. You could take that spinner bait, bumping along all the brush or grass or whatever you're going against, and then go turn around, come back, and then you could throw a Spence Scout right in that area, because a Scout in slightly stained water will run just almost out of sight. Like I said, it'll run about that deep. And if you had a weight in front of it, it runs even a little bit deeper. This might actually be good on a Carolina rig. If you've got open water that you're not worried about getting anything hung, that could be a good Carolina rig option. But I saw a guy on Instagram a while back that had full, like, 40 strand skirts on the back of these things, and he posted, he said, hey, I got these things ready to go and everything, and can't wait to try these out. And I even sent him a message. I said, dude, you need to keep these skirts very thin, otherwise you do hamper the action of the bait. This bait has a lot of action. But the thicker you go with that skirt, the less that bait's going to have that action. It's going to be very sluggish. He never answered me back. Maybe he found out himself. I don't know. But when you replace these rubber skirts, I mentioned this before on one of the videos I was using this on, is you keep these things thin, say 15 strands. And I always like to match the colors with the skirts. It's got yellow with red eyes, so I use the yellow and red skirt. You know, it's got chartreuse and black eyes, so I use a chartreuse with a black skirt. I guess this right here is what you call a crawfish. Brown, pearl, and orange. So I just put a brown and orange skirt back here for crawfish pattern. If you want to use this in rapids where you have 2 to 3 foot of water, that'd be a good bait right there. But the Spence Scout, to me, is a good all-around shallow water crankbait. For me, it's probably my favorite shallow water crankbait, just for the simple fact that you can throw this thing in a tree and crank it right back to you. It's rare it gets hung up. I mean, I'm being serious about that. It's rare that it gets hung up, and it even helps that you've got the short shank hooks on there. If you go a little bit longer hook, you might run the risk of actually getting it hung a little bit. But I'm very confident, if I'm fishing a brush pile, I'm very confident to throw that dude right up in there and crank it right back to me. You know, if you feel any kind of tension, it's the same as a crankbait. If you feel tension on it, if you can't see that bait when it's coming back to you, slow down, and when you feel it stop, just give it just a slight second and start bringing it back to you. It'll come right over that cover. A lot of times I'm still cranking it, still comes over the cover. But the Water Scout is a great bait. Unfortunately, they're discontinued. However, you can still find them on eBay under Clark Water Scout or Spence Scout. One of the two. You can find them one way or the other. Like I said, personally myself, I can't tell you what the difference is. These two are Strike Kings, so they were labeled anyway. But I know this is a Strike King because of the color pattern. But this one might have actually been a Clark. I'm not really sure. But they bought them, I think, in 67 or 68 is when Charles Spence bought them when he started Strike King. And he actually started Strike King with the help of Bill Dance. In case you ever wonder why Bill Dance was Strike King for so long. Because he had a part of it. But there's so many different color patterns. And like I said, it's a shallow water bait. So I kind of treat these things as a spinner bait. But I don't mind throwing some crawfish patterns in there too. Because it's, especially if you're fishing in rapids, that's definitely a bait I want to try. But what's really cool, like I said before, you can throw this as a top water bait, dottle it on top, and this kind of works like a hula popper. You know, kind of undulates underwater, that rubber skirt. And then you can also cast out again and just wake it. And this is a great waking bait, especially if you hold that rod tip up and you're just barely cranking that thing. It'll go into the water just like this and leave that wake back there. But you can also burn it. You can slow crank it. There's so many things you can do with these things. Like I said, a lot of the new guys coming into bass fishing are not aware of these. And you can always find them on eBay. You're going to pay for some of them. And me personally, if I was you, if you buy one, take the parts off of it, and then give it a good clear coat. Me personally, I prefer to use the kind of clear coats I use on threads when I'm tying rods. That's the clear coat I like because it's flexible. It's not going to chip off the bait. But you can use straight epoxy, like 2-part epoxy, 2-hour cure. Don't use a 5-minute. It will yellow within a couple of weeks. Use a 2-hour cure, and you can do that. The only problem I have with that is it will chip. And it'll also yellow as years go by. Using a rod finish, it won't yellow as the years go by. So that's the only reason I use the rod finish. You can use Flex Coat. You can use the CBD Pro Coat from Mudhole. You could also use KBS, which is expensive, but it's a really good clear coat. But anything to keep this wood from cracking any more than it already is. I got very slight cracks in this one right here. Even the plastic one, the paint was starting to crack a little bit, so I went ahead and clear coated it. Give it a day or two, put it back together, you're good to go. It won't chip, It'll stay together. The finish will be beautiful. I mean, I don't know if you can see that, but that's just as shiny as it could be with that clear coat. But that's all I got for Scouts. It's a great shallow water crankbait, and like I said, it's one of my favorites. It's got a great profile and something about that skirt back there. This is the only crankbait I've ever thrown that was not affected by having something in the back. Any other kind of crankbait with a little hackle trailer or anything on the back, to me personally, has killed it. But something about that bait right there, man, it overpowers whatever you put on the back, unless you make it too thick, and then it kills it. And keep it short. It's like I said in the video when I was using these things, keep it short. Say about an inch, inch and a quarter, no more than that. I'll do a video down the road on how I actually modify these skirts, how I actually take them off and then put other colors together. I'll eventually do a video on that. That's all I have for the Scout today, guys. So until next time, may the Father bless you and keep you in Yeshua's name. And as always, fish on.